Get out, now! Linda Crawford's voice slices through the afternoon heat like a blade. She stands 3 feet from two 13-year-old black boys, her manicured finger pointing at them like a weapon. You people don't belong in this neighborhood. Marcus drops his basketball. It rolls toward the fence as both boys freeze, their childhood innocence colliding with adult hatred in broad daylight. We're just playing, Malik starts. I don't care what you're doing. Linda steps closer, invading their space with deliberate aggression. This is a private community. You're trespassing. She pulls out her phone, holding it up like a threat. I'm calling the police right now to report 2 suspicious black males. The boys' faces shift from confusion to recognition to fear. They know this story. They've heard it end badly. Linda's thumb hovers over 911 as she smiles with cruel satisfaction. Let's see how tough you are when the cops get here. The phone connects. Her voice turns sickeningly sweet. 911? I need the police immediately. What Linda doesn't know is that she just made the biggest mistake of her life. The day began with triumph. At 8 a.m., Sarah Williams sat in the bright studio lights of Good Morning Miami, her tailored navy suit commanding respect as she faced host Patricia Martinez across the polished desk. The chyron beneath her name read, Civil Rights Attorney, $50 million police brutality settlement. Sarah, this is the largest settlement in Florida history for a police misconduct case. Patricia leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. What does this victory mean for families across the state? Sarah's response was measured, professional, but carried an undercurrent of barely contained emotion. Patricia, this isn't just about money. It's about accountability. For too long, we've seen police departments operate with impunity when it comes to racial bias. Yesterday's verdict sends a clear message that a badge doesn't equal immunity. The camera captured Sarah's composure perfectly, the quiet strength of a woman who had spent 15 years building cases that most attorneys wouldn't touch. Her law degree from Harvard hung in her office, but her real education had come from growing up in Liberty City, watching her own father subjected to traffic stops that lasted 45 minutes for infractions that earned white drivers warnings. You've mentioned that this case was personal, Patricia continued. Can you elaborate? Sarah's pause was brief, but viewers caught the flicker of something deeper. I have twin sons, 13 years old. Every day I teach them their rights because I know that knowledge might be the only protection they have. No parent should have to have that conversation, but until we reform how police interact with communities of color, that's our reality. The interview continued for another 12 minutes, covering police reform initiatives, bias training programs, and Sarah's next legal targets. What viewers saw was professional excellence. What they didn't see was the exhaustion beneath the surface, the 3 hours of sleep, the coffee-stained legal briefs scattered across her kitchen table, the weight of carrying not just her own family's hopes, but those of every family who looked like hers. By 10:30 a.m., Sarah was pulling into her driveway on Magnolia Court, a tree-lined street in Coral Springs where she'd deliberately chosen to raise her boys. The house was modest by the neighborhood standards, a 4-bedroom colonial with cream siding and black shutters, but it represented everything she'd worked toward: safety, stability, the chance for her sons to grow up without looking over their shoulders. Marcus and Malik were waiting in the kitchen, still in their summer school clothes, backpacks dropped by the door with the casual disregard of adolescence. At 13, they were already taller than most of their classmates, their voices in that awkward stage between childhood and whatever came next. But their faces still lit up when they saw her, and for a moment, the weight of the morning's television appearance lifted. Mom, you were amazing! Marcus rushed to her side, his NASA t-shirt wrinkled from a morning spent bent over math worksheets. Mrs. Peterson made our whole class watch during current events. Malik nodded enthusiastically from his position at the kitchen counter, where he was constructing what could generously be called a sandwich. Everyone was like, "That's your mom? You look like those lawyers on TV shows." Sarah laughed, the sound genuine for the first time all day. I am one of those lawyers, baby. Just happens to be real life instead of television. She kicked off her heels and surveyed her kitchen, the nerve center of their small family. Homework still covered the breakfast table. The dishwasher hummed its familiar rhythm. Normal life, the kind she fought so hard to preserve for them, continued in all its beautiful mundanity. "So what's the plan for this afternoon?" she asked, loosening the blazer that had felt like armor during the interview. "Basketball," both boys said simultaneously, their twin telepathy as strong as ever. Sarah glanced at the clock. "Summer school homework finished?" "All done." Malik held up a completed packet. "Mr. Rodriguez said if we finish the week's work early, we get extra gym time." "And you'll be back by 4?" "4 sharp," Marcus confirmed. "Same as always." Sarah studied their faces, seeing her own features reflected back. The strong jawline inherited from her father, the determined eyes that had gotten her through law school. But there was something else there. Something she'd worked hard to preserve. Innocence. The ability to move through the world without calculating threat levels, without scanning every interaction for signs of danger. "All right," she said finally. "But you know the rules." "Stay together," they recited in unison. "Keep your phones on. Keep our phones on. And if anyone gives us trouble, we record everything. Stay calm and call you immediately," Malik finished. "Mom, we know. We've got this." Sarah wanted to protest, to keep them close where she could see them, where she could stand between them and a world that might not see their youth, their intelligence, their gentle hearts. Instead, she saw what she had given them: confidence, knowledge, the tools to navigate spaces that hadn't always welcomed people who looked like them. "Go," she said, and meant it. "Just be safe." They grabbed their basketballs from the garage, identical Spalding spheres worn smooth from months of practice, and headed down Magnolia Court with the easy stride of boys who belonged exactly where they were. Sarah watched from the front window until they turned the corner toward the recreation area, then retreated to her bedroom for the nap she desperately needed. The house settled into the afternoon quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. A neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent. The Good Morning Miami interview was already being shared on social media, generating comments from supporters and detractors in equal measure. Sarah's phone buzzed periodically with congratulatory messages from colleagues, interview requests from other stations, and the usual hate mail that followed any high-profile civil rights victory. She ignored all of it. For the first time in months, Sarah Williams, Harvard Law graduate, civil rights champion, the woman who had just won $50 million for a family destroyed by police violence, allowed herself to simply be tired. Outside, her sons made their way toward the basketball court where they'd spent countless summer afternoons perfecting their free throws and arguing about everything from NBA stats to whether alien life existed. They walked with the casual ownership of space that their mother had fought to give them, unaware that their perfect morning was about to collide with someone else's deeply imperfect worldview. The transition from triumph to catastrophe would take exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. Linda Crawford had been watching from her kitchen window for 23 minutes when she finally decided to act. The boys had arrived at the basketball court with their usual easy confidence, and something about their comfortable familiarity with the space irritated her beyond reason. They moved like they belonged there, like they had every right to occupy a space she had mentally claimed as part of her domain. From her vantage point in the sprawling ranch house at 847 Magnolia Court, Linda had a perfect view of the recreation area. The house itself was a testament to her success. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a kitchen island larger than most people's bedrooms. Real estate had been good to Linda Crawford. 22 years of showing properties, negotiating deals, and cultivating the kind of professional relationships that opened doors had built this life of comfort and control. But control was exactly what felt threatened as she watched the boys warm up with practiced shots. They weren't just playing basketball, they were claiming territory. And in Linda's carefully ordered world, territory belonged to people who looked like her, earned like her, and understood the unspoken rules of suburban hierarchy. She smoothed her blonde hair, still perfectly styled from this morning's appointments, and adjusted the blazer she'd worn to show a property on Pine Ridge Drive. The Royal Palm Realty badge clipped to her lapel caught the afternoon light, a small symbol of the authority she wielded in this community. Homeowners Association meetings, property value discussions, neighborhood watch coordination. Linda Crawford was someone who got things done. The walk from her front door to the basketball court took exactly 97 steps. Linda had counted them during previous reconnaissance missions, those times when she'd observed other irregularities in the neighborhood's carefully maintained order. Each step reinforced her sense of purpose. This was her community. These were her standards to enforce. The boys noticed her approach but didn't stop playing. Marcus attempted a three-point shot that arced beautifully through the Florida heat before swishing through the net. Malik retrieved the ball and passed it back with the fluid motion of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting the fundamentals. Their concentration was complete, their joy obvious, their belonging absolute. Linda's heels clicked against the asphalt as she entered the court area. The sound was sharp, deliberate, designed to command attention. When the boys continued playing, she cleared her throat with theatrical authority. "Excuse me." Her voice carried the crisp articulation of someone accustomed to being heard in boardrooms and city council meetings. "Do you boys live in this neighborhood?" Marcus caught the ball and held it against his hip, his posture respectful but not submissive. The careful manners his mother had instilled showed in the way he made eye contact, the way he waited before responding. "We're just playing basketball, ma'am." The response irritated Linda because it wasn't really an answer, and because it came without the deference she expected. These weren't small children who could be easily intimidated. At 13, both boys had grown into their height, their voices deeper, their presence more substantial. But that substance, rather than commanding respect, only fed Linda's sense that they represented something dangerous. "That's not what I asked." Linda stepped closer, positioning herself between the boys and the basket. The movement was calculated, a physical assertion of control over the space. "I asked if you live here. This is a private community recreation area. It's for residents only." Malik pointed toward the faded sign posted near the court's entrance. "The sign says Coral Springs Public Recreation Area, open dawn to dusk." Linda's jaw tightened. The sign was a complication she had hoped they wouldn't notice, a detail that undermined her narrative of private ownership. But her years in real estate had taught her that perception often mattered more than facts, that confidence could reshape reality. "Don't get smart with me, young man." Her voice carried a warning edge. "I don't care what some old sign says. This neighborhood has standards. We have rules about who belongs here and who doesn't." The boys exchanged a look that spoke of conversations they'd had with their parents, training they'd received for exactly this type of encounter. Stay calm. Stay polite. Don't give them ammunition, but don't back down from your rights either. "Ma'am, we're not causing any trouble," Marcus said carefully. "We're just practicing our free throws. We'll clean up when we leave." "Where are your parents?" Linda demanded, her volume rising with her frustration. "Do they know you're wandering around neighborhoods where you don't belong?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Linda's posture had shifted from merely confrontational to actively aggressive, shoulders squared, chin raised, finger beginning to point. The transformation was complete. From concerned neighbor to self-appointed enforcer of social boundaries she believed were under attack. Malik's hand moved toward his pocket, a reflexive gesture toward the phone his mother had taught him to always carry, to use wisely, to trust completely. The movement was slight, barely noticeable, but Linda's eyes tracked it like a hunter following prey. "Are you reaching for something?" Her voice turned sharp with accusation. "What's in your pocket?" "My phone, ma'am," Malik replied steadily. "My mother says we should always be able to call for help." Linda's laugh was bitter, triumphant. "Help? You think you need help? I'm a respectable member of this community trying to maintain our property values and our safety. If anyone needs help, it's the people who have to deal with trespassers who think they can go anywhere they want." She pulled out her own phone, holding it like a weapon. The iPhone 14 in its rose gold case caught the sunlight as she waved it in their direction. The gesture was meant to intimidate, to establish technological superiority, to remind them that she had resources they couldn't match. "I'm calling the police," Linda announced with satisfaction. "Let's see how tough you are when real authority gets here. Let's see how your mother feels about teaching you to trespass in decent neighborhoods." The boys stood frozen, not in fear but in recognition. This was the moment their mother had prepared them for, the encounter that every black parent in America dreads and anticipates. The moment when childhood innocence collides with adult prejudice, when playing basketball becomes a crime, when existing in space becomes grounds for punishment. Linda's thumb hovered over 911 as she smiled with cruel anticipation. She had no idea that 3 blocks away, the woman who had just discussed police reform on morning television was about to wake up to the sound of sirens in her own neighborhood. The moment Linda's phone emerged, Malik's training kicked in. His mother's voice echoed in his memory like a mantra. "If someone threatens to call the police, you start recording immediately. Evidence protects you when nothing else will." His hand moved to his pocket with deliberate calm, withdrawing his phone with the measured precision of someone who understood the stakes. The camera app opened with a soft electronic chime that seemed to echo across the basketball court like a bell tolling. "Don't you dare record me!" Linda's voice cracked with outrage, her carefully maintained composure fracturing. The red record button on Malik's screen represented something she hadn't anticipated: accountability. "You have no right to film me!" Marcus stepped closer to his brother, their twin synchronicity emerging in crisis the way it had throughout their childhood. Where Malik documented, Marcus would speak. Where one showed vulnerability, the other provided strength. They had learned this dance through years of navigating a world that required them to be twice as good, twice as careful, twice as prepared. "Ma'am, we're recording for our safety," Marcus said, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation their mother had drilled into them. "It's our legal right to document any interaction with someone who threatens to call the police." Linda's face flushed red beneath her carefully applied foundation. The boy's calm competence unraveled her narrative of dangerous juveniles who needed adult control. These weren't frightened children she could intimidate into submission. They were prepared, trained, armed with knowledge that transformed her authority into something questionable. "Your legal right?" she sputtered. "Who taught you to talk about legal rights? What kind of parents raise children to be so disrespectful?" Malik adjusted his phone angle to capture Linda's full figure, ensuring the audio picked up every word. His mother had taught him about frame composition during their evening discussions about civil rights history. "Wide shots show context," she'd explained. "Close-ups can be manipulated, but wide shots tell the whole story." "Ma'am, we're being completely respectful," Marcus continued. "We answered your questions honestly. We showed you the public recreation sign. We offered to clean up after ourselves. We haven't raised our voices or used any inappropriate language." The recitation was tactical, each point delivered like evidence in a case their mother had taught them to build from the moment any confrontation began. Linda found herself facing not children but junior attorneys who understood exactly what game was being played. "This is a private community," Linda's voice rose to something approaching a shout. "I don't care what some faded sign says. This basketball court serves the families who live here, who pay taxes here, who belong here." According to the Coral Springs Municipal Code Section 12.3.7, Malik said quietly, still filming, "public recreation areas funded with municipal bonds cannot be restricted based on residency status during posted operating hours." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The boy had just quoted municipal code to her. Municipal code. She was a real estate agent. She should know those regulations better than some 13-year-old kid. But the confidence in his voice suggested knowledge she couldn't challenge. "Where did you learn?" she stammered. "Our mother taught us," Marcus said simply. "She says knowledge is the most powerful weapon you can carry, and it's the one they can never take away from you." The words hung in the afternoon air like a prophecy. Linda heard threat in the boy's calm certainty, in the way he spoke about knowledge as weaponry, in the suggestion that they might want to disarm him. But the boys heard something else entirely. Their mother's love translated into preparation, her expertise transformed into protection, her legal mind ensuring their survival. "Your mother," Linda's voice dripped with disdain. "And what exactly does your mother do that makes her such an expert on legal rights?" It was a question born of pure arrogance, the assumption that whatever authority figure had educated these boys couldn't possibly match Linda's middle-class standing, her professional credentials, her social position in the community hierarchy. She expected to hear about a teacher, maybe a social worker, someone whose advice could be dismissed as irrelevant idealism. Marcus and Malik exchanged the briefest glance, a moment of twin telepathy that communicated volumes. They knew exactly who their mother was, what she had accomplished, what she represented. But they also understood that revealing her identity would escalate this confrontation beyond their ability to control it. "She's taught us that every person has constitutional rights," Marcus said diplomatically, "and that those rights don't disappear just because someone else feels uncomfortable." Linda's phone buzzed in her hand, a text message that she glanced at reflexively. The momentary distraction gave the boys a chance to assess their situation with the clinical detachment their mother had taught them. Malik continued recording while Marcus cataloged details. Linda's real estate badge, her house number visible in the background, the time stamp on his brother's phone, the complete absence of any actual threatening behavior on their part. "I don't care about constitutional rights," Linda said, her attention returning to the boys with renewed venom. "I care about property values and community safety. I care about maintaining the kind of neighborhood where families can feel secure." "We're not threatening anyone's security," Malik said gently, his phone steady in his hands. "We're playing basketball." "You're loitering," Linda snapped. "You're trespassing. You're making residents uncomfortable with your presence." The word choice was telling. Not making me uncomfortable, but making residents uncomfortable. As if Linda spoke for the entire community, as if her personal discomfort had been democratically ratified by every homeowner on Magnolia Court. "Has anyone else complained about us playing here?" Marcus asked reasonably. Linda's pause was telling. The truth was that no one else had complained because no one else had noticed, or if they had noticed, they'd seen exactly what any reasonable person would see: two well-dressed children playing basketball on a summer afternoon. "That's not the point," she said finally. "The point is that you don't belong here." "According to what law?" Malik pressed gently, still recording. "According to common sense." Linda's composure cracked completely. "According to basic social order. According to the reality that some neighborhoods have standards." The boys absorbed her words with the patience of people who had heard variations of this speech their entire lives. Their mother had prepared them for this moment not with anger but with understanding. The recognition that Linda's rage wasn't really about basketball or trespassing or even them specifically. It was about control, about maintaining a version of reality where people like her got to decide who belonged where. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "we understand you're upset, but we have every right to be here, and we're not doing anything wrong." Linda stared at them both, her breath coming in short bursts. These boys, these children, had somehow turned her righteous confrontation into something that made her look unreasonable. They had knowledge, evidence, composure, and worst of all, they had made her reveal exactly who she really was. Her thumb moved to her phone's dial pad with deliberate emphasis. "Fine. If you won't leave voluntarily, we'll see what the police have to say about this situation." Linda's finger pressed 911 with the ceremonial weight of someone calling down divine judgment. She held the phone away from her ear, ensuring the boys could hear every word of the conversation that would, in her mind, restore proper order to her neighborhood. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker with professional efficiency. "This is Linda Crawford at 847 Magnolia Court in Coral Springs," she began, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used during real estate negotiations. "I need police assistance immediately. Two black males are trespassing on private property and refusing to leave when asked. Malik's phone continued recording, capturing every syllable of Linda's performance. Marcus stood beside his brother with the stillness of someone who understood that any movement, any gesture, any change in posture could be weaponized against them. "Ma'am, what are their approximate ages?" the dispatcher asked. Linda's eyes swept over the boys, taking in their height, their developing frames, their clothes that clearly marked them as students rather than threats. But her answer reflected not what she saw, but what she needed the police to believe. Teenagers, maybe 16, 17 years old. They're large for their age, and they've been loitering here for over an hour making threatening statements. Malik's eyebrows raised slightly at the age inflation, but he kept filming. Marcus remained motionless except for the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. Their mother had warned them that truth would be the first casualty in any encounter like this, that someone determined to see them as threats would reshape reality to match their fears. "What kind of threatening statements, ma'am?" Linda's pause was brief but telling. In the space between question and answer, she constructed a narrative that transformed teenage confidence into menace, legal knowledge into insolence, simple presence into invasion. "They're talking about their rights, about laws, about how they can do whatever they want," she said, her voice gaining confidence with each fabrication. "They're recording me without permission, which I believe is illegal. They're acting very aggressive and confrontational. One of them quoted some kind of legal code at me like he was threatening me with a lawsuit." The boys exchanged a look that communicated volumes. They were witnessing their own story being rewritten in real time, their polite responses becoming aggression, their legal knowledge becoming threatening behavior, their compliance becoming confrontation. "Are they armed, ma'am?" Linda's gaze swept over the boys again, searching for anything she could characterize as threatening. Marcus held a basketball. Malik held a phone. Neither carried backpacks, weapons, or anything more dangerous than the remnants of their summer school homework visible in their pockets. "I don't know," Linda said, and in those 3 words, she crossed a line that would define everything that followed. "They keep reaching into their pockets. They could have anything. I'm a single woman here, and I feel very unsafe. They've been acting erratically, pacing around, talking to each other in low voices like they're planning something." The boys hadn't been pacing. They had been standing still for the entire 20-minute encounter, but Linda's imagination supplied movement where none existed, conspiracy where there was only confusion. "Ma'am, are you in a safe location?" "I'm maintaining distance, but they're blocking my path back to my house," Linda lied smoothly. Her front door was clearly visible behind her, 30 feet of open lawn providing an unobstructed route to safety. "They've positioned themselves between me and my property. It feels very intentional, very threatening." The transformation was complete. Linda Crawford, who lived in a house worth $600,000, who carried a real estate license and a concealed weapons permit, who was 6 feet from her own front door in broad daylight in one of Florida's safest suburbs, had become a damsel in distress, threatened by 2 8th graders playing basketball. "Units are en route, ma'am. Please maintain a safe distance until officers arrive." "Thank you," Linda said, her satisfaction evident. "These boys have no idea what they've gotten themselves into. I hope their parents are prepared to deal with the consequences of raising children who think they can intimidate law-abiding citizens." She ended the call and stood watching the boys with the expression of someone who had just played a winning hand. But Marcus and Malik weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking past her, at the neighbors who had begun emerging from houses up and down Magnolia Court. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 houses down stood on her front porch, her phone also raised, recording the confrontation. Her expression was troubled as she watched a grown woman celebrate calling police on children. Mr. Peterson, walking his golden retriever, had stopped on the sidewalk to observe, his weathered face creased with concern. The teenage daughter of the family across the street watched from her bedroom window, her own phone capturing the scene from a different angle. Old Mr. Williams, a retired teacher who had lived on Magnolia Court for 37 years, emerged from his garage with pruning shears still in hand. drawn by the commotion. His eyes moved from Linda to the boys to the growing collection of phones documenting the confrontation. Linda noticed the gathering audience and felt vindicated. Here was community support for her actions. Neighbors who understood that she was protecting their shared investment in suburban tranquility. What she didn't recognize was the expression on their faces, not support, but growing unease as they watched a grown woman call police on children who were clearly doing nothing wrong. The sirens began as distant whispers, barely audible over the ambient sounds of suburban afternoon life. But they grew steadily louder, more insistent, until the peaceful rhythm of Coral Springs was overwhelmed by the urgent wail of emergency response vehicles racing toward a basketball court where two boys stood filming their own pursuit. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from their mother. "Having fun at the court? Don't forget sunscreen." The irony was so complete, so perfectly timed, that he almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he felt a crushing wave of sadness that his mother's casual concern would soon transform into the kind of parental terror that haunted black families across America. "You should have left when I gave you the chance," Linda said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed justice was racing toward them in the form of flashing lights and sirens. "Now you'll learn what happens when you don't respect authority in this neighborhood. Your parents are going to have some very serious questions to answer about how they raised you." The first police cruiser rounded the corner onto Magnolia Court with lights strobing but siren now silent, a tactical choice that somehow made the vehicle's presence more ominous rather than less. The black and white Coral Springs Police Department vehicle moved with deliberate slowness, allowing its occupants to assess the scene before committing to action. A second cruiser followed 30 seconds behind, then a third. 3 patrol cars for 2 boys with a basketball. The deployment suggested danger on a scale that existed nowhere except in Linda Crawford's 911 call and whatever assumptions those call details had generated in the minds of responding officers. The neighborhood fell silent except for the sound of car doors slamming and radio chatter crackling through the afternoon air. Dogs stopped barking. Air conditioning units seemed to hum more quietly. Even the wind appeared to pause, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of what was about to unfold. The boys stood exactly where they had been standing when Linda first approached them 26 minutes earlier. They had not moved toward her, away from her, or anywhere else. They had not raised their voices, made threatening gestures, or done anything beyond exercising their constitutional right to exist in public space while black. But as the police cars arranged themselves around the basketball court like predators surrounding prey, Marcus and Malik understood that none of their innocence, none of their compliance, none of their careful preparation would matter in the next few minutes. The first officer emerged from his vehicle with his hand resting on his service weapon, not drawn, but positioned for quick access. He was approximately 35 years old, white, with the practiced awareness of someone who had responded to thousands of calls that began exactly like this one. "Step away from each other," he commanded, his voice carrying across the basketball court with unmistakable authority. "Hands where I can see them." Sarah Williams woke to the sound of sirens cutting through the afternoon quiet like knives through silk. 3 blocks away, but getting closer. Always getting closer in a neighborhood where emergency vehicles were as rare as snow in July. She sat up in bed, her lawyer's instincts pulling her from sleep faster than any alarm clock. Something was wrong. The sirens weren't passing through, they were arriving. Multiple vehicles, coordinated response, the kind of deployment that meant serious trouble in suburbia. Sarah moved to her bedroom window and saw the flashing lights painting the tree-lined street in alternating reds and blues. Her blood chilled as she realized the direction. The basketball court. Her boys. She was running before conscious thought caught up with adrenaline, bare feet flying down the stairs, through the kitchen, out the front door without stopping for shoes or keys or any of the careful preparation that defined her professional life. The perfectly manicured lawn of Magnolia Court had never felt so endless as she sprinted toward the strobing lights that surrounded her children. The scene that greeted her was every black parent's nightmare made manifest. 3 police cruisers arranged in a semicircle around the basketball court. Her sons, her babies, standing with their hands cuffed behind their backs like common criminals. Officers treating 13-year-olds like dangerous suspects, while neighbors recorded everything on phones that would soon feed social media algorithms designed to turn tragedy into entertainment. "What are you doing to my children?" Sarah's voice cut across the crowd with the force of 15 years spent arguing cases in courtrooms where her presence challenged every assumption about who belonged at the defense table. Every head turned toward her. Every phone swiveled to capture this new development in what was becoming a neighborhood spectacle. She ran directly toward her sons, maternal instinct overwhelming any tactical consideration about approaching armed police officers. Officer Martinez, a 10-year veteran of the Coral Springs Police Department, stepped into her path with his hand raised. "Ma'am, step back. We're handling a situation here." Sarah's eyes blazed with fury that made her morning television composure look like a gentle warm-up. "Those are my sons! Take those handcuffs off immediately!" "Ma'am, we received a call about suspicious individuals." "Suspicious?" Sarah's voice rose to something approaching a roar. "They're 13 years old playing basketball. What exactly is suspicious about children exercising in a public recreation area?" Linda Crawford stepped forward from her position near the fence, sensing an opportunity to reassert control over a situation that had somehow shifted away from her. "These boys were trespassing and became aggressive when I asked them to leave. They were making threats." Sarah's attention swung toward Linda like a laser finding its target. For the first time since waking up, she had a clear view of the woman who had called the police on her children. Middle-aged, blonde, professionally dressed, wearing the expression of someone who expected to be believed without question. "You called the police on my children?" Sarah's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting, the controlled fury of someone who knew exactly how to weaponize words. "For playing basketball?" "I was protecting this neighborhood," Linda began. "From what?" Sarah stepped closer, and Linda instinctively stepped back. "From children? From students? From boys doing exactly what this court was designed for." Officer Martinez attempted to regain control. "Ma'am, I need to see your identification." Sarah pulled her bar association card from her pajama pocket, along with her driver's license. The movement was sharp, efficient, betraying none of the trembling rage that coursed through her system. "Attorney Sarah Williams, those are my sons Marcus and Malik Williams. Now uncuff them immediately before this becomes a federal case." The name hung in the air for a moment before recognition dawned on Officer Martinez's face. He had heard that name recently, very recently. Something about a big settlement, a television interview, a lawyer who specialized in exactly the kind of case that was developing around him right now. "Wait," he said slowly, his mind racing through morning briefings and news coverage. "Sarah Williams, weren't you on TV this morning?" The question transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Suddenly, Linda's confident narrative of dangerous juveniles collided with the reality that she had called police on the children of a woman who had spent the morning discussing police reform on live television. Sarah's expression shifted from maternal rage to professional calculation. "Good morning, Miami. We discussed the $50 million police brutality settlement I won against the Broward County Sheriff's Office, the case that established new precedents for accountability when officers failed to recognize their own racial bias." Officer Martinez felt the blood drain from his face. His partner, Officer Davis, had gone completely still beside their patrol car, the recognition hitting him like a physical blow. They had just handcuffed the children of the lawyer who had become famous for suing police departments, the lawyer who specialized in civil rights violations, the lawyer who had won the largest police misconduct settlement in Florida history. Linda's confusion was evident as she looked between Sarah and the officers, trying to understand why everyone's demeanor had suddenly changed. "I don't care if she was on television," she said, her voice carrying less confidence than before. "These boys were trespassing." "On a public basketball court?" Sarah turned her professional attention to Linda like a prosecutor examining a hostile witness. The same court that's clearly marked with Coral Springs municipal signage indicating public access from dawn to dusk. "They don't live here," Linda protested weakly. "According to what law does residency determine access to municipal recreation facilities?" Sarah's voice carried the crisp precision of someone who had memorized every relevant statute. "Are you familiar with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment? Or perhaps the Civil Rights Act of 1968? The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, their phones capturing every word of an exchange that was rapidly becoming a masterclass in civil rights law delivered by a mother in pajamas whose children were still handcuffed for the crime of existing while black. Officer Martinez made the decision that would define the rest of his career. "Release them," he said quietly to his partner. The metallic click of handcuffs being removed echoed across the basketball court like a bell tolling the end of Linda Crawford's authority. Marcus and Malik rubbed their wrists where the metal had bitten into Young's skin, their dignity slowly returning as circulation restored feeling to fingers that had gone numb with restraint. Sarah gathered her sons into a fierce embrace that spoke of relief, rage, and the primal protectiveness that had driven her barefoot sprint across 3 blocks of suburban perfection. She held them close enough to feel their heartbeats, to confirm they were unharmed, to reassure herself that this nightmare was real, but ending. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, her hands checking for injuries that wouldn't show on cameras, but could last a lifetime in memory. "Did they hurt you?" "We're okay, Mom," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had aged years in the past 30 minutes. "We did exactly what you taught us. We stayed calm. We recorded everything. We knew our rights." "We got it all on video," Malik added, holding up his phone like evidence in a case that was already building itself. "Every word she said, every lie she told the 911 dispatcher." Sarah's expression shifted from maternal relief to professional interest as she reviewed the footage her sons had captured. The video quality was perfect. Clear audio, steady camera work, wide shots that captured context, and close-ups that documented details. Their preparation had paid off in ways that would soon reshape this entire confrontation. Linda Crawford watched this reunion with growing unease. The dynamic had shifted so dramatically that she found herself questioning her own version of events. These weren't dangerous juveniles being reunited with an irresponsible parent. This was a professional woman, a lawyer apparently, embracing children who looked like honor students rather than threats. But Linda's confusion ran deeper than simple misidentification. Something about Sarah Williams nagged at her memory. Something familiar about the woman's bearing, her voice, the way she commanded attention without raising her volume. Where had she seen this woman before? "Officer Martinez," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the measured authority of someone who spent her days in courtrooms rather than the raw emotion of a mother protecting her cubs. "I assume you'll be filing a report about this incident?" Martinez nodded reluctantly. He was beginning to understand the scope of the mistake that had unfolded around him. "Yes, ma'am. Standard procedure for any call involving minors." "Excellent. I'll want copies of that report along with the 911 call transcript and any body camera footage your department may have captured." Sarah's tone was businesslike, professional, but underneath lay the promise of consequences. "I assume your officers are equipped with body cameras?" "Yes, ma'am," Martinez replied, his discomfort growing with each question that highlighted the evidence trail he couldn't control. Linda's mind raced as she watched Sarah interact with the police officers. The woman's legal knowledge was comprehensive, her comfort with police procedure evident, her ability to shift from emotional mother to calculating attorney seamless. This wasn't someone who had Googled their rights after being wronged. This was someone who knew the system from the inside. Officer Davis, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, if you're the attorney from this morning's news interview, we want to make sure there are no misunderstandings about what happened here." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. This morning's news interview, Sarah Williams, attorney. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Linda's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, fingers fumbling as she searched for Sarah Williams' attorney interview. The results loaded with crystal clarity. Local attorney wins record $50 million police brutality settlement. Below that, civil rights lawyer discusses police reform on Good Morning Miami. And finally, the photograph that made Linda's stomach drop. Sarah Williams, sitting in a television studio, wearing the same confident expression she now directed at the officers who had handcuffed her children. Sarah's smile was arctic as she continued her questioning. "Oh, there are no misunderstandings, Officer Davis. The situation is quite clear. A woman called 911 with false information about my children, claiming they were trespassing on public property, inflating their ages, suggesting they were armed and dangerous, and characterizing their legal knowledge as threatening behavior. Your department responded by handcuffing 13-year-olds without investigation, without cause, and without consideration for the possibility that the complainant might be lying." Linda stepped forward, desperation creeping into her voice as the full scope of her mistake became clear. "I wasn't lying. These boys were being disrespectful, talking about laws and rights like they were trying to intimidate me." "Mrs. Sarah paused expectantly. "Crawford. Linda Crawford." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly as she filed the name away for future reference. "Mrs. Crawford, are you suggesting that children's knowledge of their constitutional rights constitutes intimidating behavior? Are you testifying that teenage boys understanding municipal codes represents a threat to community safety?" Linda's face flushed as she realized her words were being turned against her with surgical precision. Behind her growing panic, she could see neighbors continuing to record, their phones capturing every word of her testimony against herself. "They were being smart, Alex. They were challenging my authority." "Your authority to do what exactly?" Sarah pressed, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of a prosecutor who had trapped a witness in contradiction. "To exclude children from public property based on your personal comfort level, to determine who belongs in spaces funded by taxpayer money, to weaponize police response against families you find undesirable." The gathered neighbors shifted uncomfortably as Sarah's questions exposed the foundation of Linda's actions. Mrs. Rodriguez, still recording from her porch, felt her understanding of the situation crystallize. This wasn't community protection. This was racial profiling documented in real time. Mr. Peterson shook his head in disgust, his golden retriever sensing the tension and whining softly. Old Mr. Williams had emerged from his garage fully now, pruning shears forgotten in his hand as he watched the confrontation unfold. As a retired educator, he recognized the boys' respectful demeanor, their articulate responses, their complete lack of aggressive behavior. He also recognized something else, the look of terror on Linda Crawford's face as she realized she had picked a fight with someone equipped to fight back. Officer Martinez's radio crackled with dispatcher chatter, but he ignored it, focused entirely on the legal landmine he was standing in the middle of. Sarah Williams wasn't just any attorney. She was a civil rights specialist who had just won the largest police misconduct settlement in state history, and she was standing in front of him discussing the constitutional violations he had just participated in. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. The woman who had spent her morning discussing police reform was now standing in her pajamas, documenting police misconduct against her own children, surrounded by the kind of evidence that had made her career possible. "Mrs. Crawford," Sarah continued, her attention returning to Linda with laser focus. "You mentioned to the dispatcher that my sons were 16 or 17 years old. Do they look 16 to you?" Linda glanced at Marcus and Malik, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. In their NASA t-shirts and basketball shorts, they looked exactly like what they were, middle school students who had grown tall early, their faces still carrying the soft edges of childhood despite their height. They're big for their age," Linda stammered. "They're 13, Sarah said flatly. 13 years old in 8th grade. Honor roll students who have never been in trouble with law enforcement. So when you told the dispatcher they were 17, that was—" "A mistake," Linda said quickly. "A mistake. And when you said they were making threatening statements, but the only statements they made involved citing municipal law and asserting their constitutional rights. That was... Linda's silence stretched uncomfortably as she realized every word she spoke was creating evidence for whatever legal action would inevitably follow. And when you suggested they might be armed, despite seeing clearly that they carried nothing but a basketball and a cell phone, that was... I felt threatened, Linda said desperately. Sarah's expression was incredulous. You felt threatened by children playing basketball in daylight, in a public space. While you were calling the police, they were recording for their own protection. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the neighborhood. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers craning their necks to see what was happening. Social media notifications were already beginning to ping as the first videos uploaded to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Someone had already created the hashtag #BasketballKaren, and it was beginning its viral journey across platforms where content lived and died based on how effectively it triggered emotional responses. Linda's phone buzzed with notifications as people began tagging her in posts, as neighbors uploaded their videos with her full name attached. Her real estate license number was being shared. Her home address was becoming public knowledge. The internet's investigative machinery was already grinding into motion, ready to dissect every aspect of her life with the same enthusiasm she had brought to harassing children. Officer Martinez made a decision that would haunt his career for months to come. Mrs. Williams, we apologize for any misunderstanding. Your sons were clearly not engaged in any illegal activity. Misunderstanding? Sarah's voice rose again, and Linda could hear in it the same tone that had commanded television audiences that morning. You handcuffed my children based on false information from someone who admitted she felt threatened by 8th graders discussing municipal law. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a systematic failure of police procedure that resulted in the civil rights violation of 2 minors. Linda Crawford watched the conversation with growing horror as she began to understand what she had done. She had called the police on the children of someone who sued police departments for a living. Someone who had just won $50 million doing exactly that. Someone who was now standing in front of multiple cameras, documenting every word of a confrontation that was spiraling completely out of her control. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, Linda said weakly, her voice carrying none of the authority it had held 30 minutes earlier. From what? Sarah asked one final time, her question echoing across the basketball court like a judge demanding final testimony. From children who know their rights? From families who understand the law? From Black people who refuse to accept that your discomfort determines their access to public space? The question hung in the air like an indictment, and in the silence that followed, Linda Crawford finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She had awakened something far more dangerous than 2 boys with a basketball. She had awakened the law itself, personified in a woman who had dedicated her career to making people like Linda pay the price for exactly this kind of behavior. The first video uploaded to social media at 4:23 p.m., exactly 47 minutes after Linda Crawford had dialed 911. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been recording from her front porch, hit share on Facebook with shaking hands and a caption that would define the narrative for everything that followed. Racist Karen calls cops on kids playing basketball, then finds out their mom is the civil rights lawyer from this morning's news. The video was 93 seconds of compressed outrage. It captured Linda's confrontation with the boys, her false 911 call, the arrival of 3 police cars for 2 children, and Sarah Williams emerging like an avenging angel in pajamas to reclaim her handcuffed sons. But most importantly, it captured the moment of recognition, the exact instant when Officer Martinez realized he had just arrested the children of the woman who specialized in suing police departments. Within 12 minutes, the video had been shared 47 times. Within 30 minutes, it had jumped platforms to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, each share adding commentary that amplified the outrage. The story had everything social media algorithms craved: racial injustice, karmic justice, powerful women, institutional hypocrisy, and the kind of perfect irony that made viewers simultaneously furious and satisfied. The TikTok version, edited down to 60 seconds with dramatic music and text overlays, exploded first. A teenager in Denver had clipped the most damaging moments. Linda saying, "You people don't belong here." The boys calmly citing municipal law, the police handcuffing children, and Sarah's devastating revelation of her identity. The text overlay read, "When Karen calls cops on civil rights lawyers' kids the same day she was on TV talking about police reform." Instagram stories picked up the narrative next, with influencers and celebrities sharing reaction videos that reached millions of followers. A comedian with 2 million followers posted a video of herself watching the confrontation, her expressions shifting from anger to disbelief to satisfaction as the story unfolded. "This is what we mean when we say, 'Play with fire, get burned,'" she captioned the clip. Twitter became a battlefield of opinions, with verified users weighing in from across the political spectrum. Civil rights activists shared the video with commentary about systemic racism. Legal experts analyzed the constitutional violations in real-time threads. Conservative commentators questioned whether the boys had been appropriately respectful and whether Sarah Williams was exploiting the situation for professional gain. By 5:15 p.m., the hashtag #BasketballKaren was trending in South Florida. By 5:45 p.m., it had spread to Atlanta, then Nashville, then Houston. The internet's collective investigative machinery had identified Linda Crawford within 2 hours of the first upload, cross-referencing her real estate license, her home address, and her professional headshots with the woman in the videos. Reddit's r/public freakout subreddit pushed the story to its front page within an hour, generating thousands of comments that dissected every frame of the available footage. Users enhanced audio, analyzed body language, and created detailed timelines of events. Someone had already created a side-by-side comparison of Sarah's morning television interview and her afternoon confrontation with police. The juxtaposition so stark it seemed like dark satire. The investigative crowdsourcing extended beyond simple identification. Reddit users had discovered Linda's professional history, her social media posts, her Yelp reviews, and her involvement in HOA disputes going back 5 years. A pattern emerged that painted a picture of someone who had weaponized complaint systems against people of color with disturbing consistency. Sarah Williams sat in her kitchen, still in her pajamas, watching her afternoon nightmare transform into a digital wildfire. Her phone had not stopped ringing since the first video went viral. Reporters, colleagues, activists, and strangers all wanting her comment on the incident. She had turned off the ringer after the 15th call, but the screen continued to light up with notifications that felt like tiny explosions of attention she neither wanted nor needed. Her email inbox had exploded with interview requests from major networks. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Good Morning America, and dozens of other outlets were all seeking exclusive access to the family at the center of what media outlets were calling the basketball court incident, or basketball Karen confrontation. The phrases felt clinical, sanitized, divorced from the raw terror of watching her children in handcuffs. Marcus and Malik sat at the kitchen table, their homework forgotten, watching their story spread across platforms they were technically too young to use, but understood better than most adults. They watched strangers analyze their behavior, critique their clothing choices, and debate whether they had been too respectful or appropriately assertive during their encounter with Linda Crawford. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone processing a fundamental shift in how the world saw him. "People are saying you planned this." Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she had been reviewing the legal implications of filing a federal civil rights lawsuit based on the afternoon's events. "What?" "The whole thing. They're saying you told us to go to that basketball court knowing that lady would call the cops so you could sue her." Malik's voice carried the hurt confusion of someone discovering that cynicism could poison even obvious injustice. Sarah closed her laptop and moved to sit between her sons, wrapping her arms around shoulders that still seemed too young to carry the weight of national attention. "Baby, I was asleep when this happened. I woke up to sirens and ran outside in my pajamas because I heard police cars and thought you might be in danger." "We know that," Marcus said. "But look at what people are saying." He turned his phone toward her, and Sarah read comments that made her stomach clench. "Convenient how the civil rights lawyer's kids just happened to run into a racist Karen the same day as her big interview. She probably coached them on what to say. Notice how they quote legal codes? What 13-year-old knows municipal law? This whole thing feels staged, too perfect, too convenient. Follow the money. She's about to get another big settlement. Those kids are way too articulate. Nobody talks like that unless they've been coached." Sarah stared at the screen, watching her teaching her children their rights be transformed into evidence of conspiracy. She had spent years preparing Marcus and Malik for encounters with racial bias precisely because she knew they were inevitable, not because she planned to profit from them. But the internet's hunger for complexity, for hidden motives, for reasons to doubt obvious injustice, had turned her preparation into proof of manipulation. "People don't want to believe that racism is this common," she said finally. "It's easier to think this was planned than to accept that children get called police just for existing while black. It's easier to question our motives than to examine their own biases." The afternoon news had picked up the story by 6 p.m., though their coverage was notably different from the social media narrative. Channel 7's evening broadcast led with, "Local attorney's children detained after neighbor complaint," focusing on the police response rather than Linda Crawford's behavior. The anchor, a middle-aged white woman with carefully styled hair, spoke about the misunderstanding and the complex community dynamics that had led to the unfortunate incident. But Channel 12, the local black-owned station, told a different story entirely. Their coverage began with Sarah's morning interview about police reform, then cut directly to footage of her sons in handcuffs, creating a visual narrative that needed no explanation. "This morning's police reform advocate becomes this afternoon's victim," read the chyron below images of Marcus and Malik being uncuffed. The dichotomy in coverage reflected the broader social media response, where reactions split along predictable lines. Supporters shared the videos with captions like, "This is why we need police reform now," and "Sarah Williams lives what she preaches." Detractors questioned everything: the timing, the boys' responses, Sarah's motivations, even the authenticity of the recordings. Local news stations were already dispatching crews to Coral Springs for evening broadcasts, their satellite trucks beginning to line the streets around Magnolia Court. Neighbors found themselves thrust into an unwanted spotlight, with reporters approaching anyone willing to comment on Linda Crawford's character, the neighborhood's dynamics, or their observations of the afternoon's events. Linda Crawford's world was collapsing in real time. Her real estate agency had received over 300 angry phone calls by evening, forcing them to disconnect their main line and issue a statement distancing themselves from her actions. The statement, posted on their website and social media accounts, read, "Royal Palm Realty does not condone discrimination of any kind. Linda Crawford's actions do not represent our company values, and we are reviewing her association with our agency." The company's Google reviews were being bombed with one-star ratings and comments specifically about Linda's behavior. Screenshots of the reviews were being shared across social media as evidence that public opinion had definitively turned against her. The review bombing extended to Linda's personal real estate profile, where her professional rating dropped from 4.8 stars to 1.2 stars in a matter of hours. Linda herself had locked her doors, closed her blinds, and unplugged her home phone after reporters began arriving at her address. But the internet doesn't respect closed doors. Her professional headshots were being shared alongside screenshots of her 911 call transcript, creating memes that juxtaposed her smiling real estate photos with audio quotes like, "Two suspicious black males," and "They look dangerous." Someone had found her Yelp reviews, and the pattern they revealed was damning. Over the past 3 years, Linda had consistently given low ratings to businesses with predominantly black staff, often citing unprofessional behavior and attitude problems that other reviewers didn't seem to notice. The reviews were being screenshot and shared as evidence of systematic racism that extended far beyond one afternoon's confrontation. Her LinkedIn profile showed connections to local Republican organizations, HOA boards, and neighborhood watch groups that social media investigators were now scrutinizing for similar patterns of behavior. Facebook posts from years past were being unearthed and analyzed, revealing a consistent thread of complaints about declining neighborhood standards and certain types of people that read very differently in the context of the afternoon's events. Her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was fielding interview requests from news stations across the state. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman who had captured the incident on video, who had witnessed Linda's behavior firsthand, who could speak to the broader dynamics of racial tension in suburban communities. Linda has called the police 6 times in the past 2 years, Mrs. Rodriguez told Channel 12's Evening Reporter. Every single time, it was about black people in the neighborhood. The mailman who was suspicious for taking too long, the food delivery driver who was loitering, the landscaping crew who was making too much noise. We all knew this day would come. The reporter, a young black woman named Ashley Carter, pressed for details. Did neighbors ever confront Mrs. Crawford about this pattern? Mrs. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. We talked about it among ourselves, but nobody wanted to be the one to say something. You know how it is. You don't want to be accused of starting drama. But watching those boys get handcuffed today, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The interview would become another viral clip, spreading across platforms as evidence that Linda's behavior represented not an isolated incident, but a pattern of harassment that the community had enabled through silence. By 8 p.m., the story had reached national attention. CNN picked it up as part of their evening segment on racial profiling, using Sarah's case as an example of how quickly ordinary interactions could escalate into civil rights violations. Fox News covered it differently, focusing on questions about whether the police had followed proper procedures and whether community members had the right to report suspicious activity. The competing narratives reflected America's fundamental inability to agree on what racism looked like when it wasn't wearing a white hood. For some viewers, Linda Crawford represented the logical conclusion of fear-based thinking that had been normalized by years of stranger danger messaging and neighborhood watch culture. For others, she was a concerned citizen who had been unfairly demonized for trying to protect her community. By 10 p.m., #BasketballKaren was trending nationally, competing with political hashtags and celebrity gossip for top positions on Twitter's trending topics. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond the original incident to become a symbol of larger conversations about race, privilege, and justice that America had been avoiding for decades. Sarah Williams sat in her home office at 6 a.m., surrounded by legal pads covered in her neat handwriting, her laptop displaying multiple browser tabs open to municipal codes, civil rights statutes, and case law precedents. The viral storm had raged through the night, but now came the methodical work that separated professional attorneys from internet commentators, building a case that could survive judicial scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming, but evidence meant nothing without proper documentation, chain of custody, and legal strategy. Sarah had spent her career teaching other attorneys that viral videos won public opinion, but federal courts required more substantial foundations. She was about to construct a case that could reshape how police departments responded to racially motivated complaints. Her first call went to Detective James Wilson, a black investigator in the Coral Springs Police Department who had worked with Sarah on previous cases. Wilson had texted her the night before with a simple message. "We need to talk, off the record." "Sarah," Wilson's voice was grim when he answered. "I've been reviewing the incident reports from yesterday. We have problems. Big problems. How big? Linda Crawford has filed 47 complaints with our department over the past 18 months. 47, Sarah. Every single one involved people of color. Every single one resulted in a police response without investigation. We've been functioning as her personal security force without anyone noticing the pattern. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had expected a civil rights case against Linda Crawford. She hadn't anticipated systematic police department complicity spanning nearly 2 years. "Get me copies of every report," she said. "Every 911 call, every incident response, every follow-up. I need to see the entire pattern." "That's not all," Wilson continued. "I pulled Linda's husband's employment records. Robert Crawford is a union representative for the South Florida Police Benevolent Association. He's the guy who negotiated qualified immunity clauses in our last contract. He's been protecting officers from exactly the kind of lawsuit you just won against Broward County." The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Linda Crawford wasn't just a racist neighbor. She was the wife of someone who had institutional power to protect police officers from accountability. Her repeated calls weren't random acts of bigotry. They were systematic abuse of a system her husband had helped design to be unaccountable. Sarah's second call went to her law partner, Janet Morrison, who had been fielding media requests since the story broke. Morrison had already assembled a preliminary research team to investigate not just the previous day's incident, but the broader pattern of behavior that enabled it. "Janet, I need a complete background investigation on Robert Crawford and his role in police union negotiations. I need to know if Linda's complaint pattern was coordinated or protected by union influence." "Already on it," Morrison replied. "But Sarah, you should know that 3 other families have contacted us since last night. All black, all living in neighborhoods where Linda Crawford called police on them or their children. We're looking at a potential class action." The other victims had been afraid to speak out individually, knowing that challenging a white woman's word against their own would be futile. But viral video had given them cover to tell their stories, and their testimonies were devastating. Mrs. Angela Thompson from Pine Ridge Drive had been reported for suspicious behavior while walking her dog past Linda's friend's house. The police response had been 2 patrol cars and a 20-minute interrogation about why she was in that neighborhood, despite living 3 blocks away. Teenager Jamal Stevens had been stopped and questioned for loitering while waiting for his school bus after Linda called police claiming he was acting suspicious in a school zone. The irony that he was literally waiting for school transportation hadn't registered with responding officers. Most damaging was the case of Dr. Michael Roberts, a pediatrician who had been reported for breaking into a house that he had legally purchased 3 months earlier. Linda had called police claiming to witness a burglary in progress, resulting in Dr. Roberts being handcuffed in his own driveway while officers verified his ownership documents. Sarah reviewed each case with growing outrage. The pattern wasn't just racist, it was sophisticated. Linda had learned to use specific language that triggered law enforcement response. Suspicious, loitering, doesn't belong, acting strange. She had weaponized police procedure against anyone whose presence in her expanded definition of her territory made her uncomfortable. By 10 a.m., Sarah had received the 911 call recordings that Detective Wilson had promised. Listening to Linda's voice transform from concerned neighbor to increasingly frantic victim revealed a performance designed to escalate police response. In each call, Linda's descriptions became more dramatic, her fear more pronounced, her suggestions of danger more explicit. The most revealing call involved Dr. Roberts. Linda had started by reporting someone trying to get into a house, but escalated to a black male with tools attempting to break in, and finally, "I think he has a weapon, please hurry." Dr. Roberts had been carrying house keys and a stethoscope. Sarah's legal mind recognized the pattern immediately. Systematic filing of false police reports, each crafted to trigger maximum law enforcement response while maintaining plausible deniability. Linda had transformed 911 into her personal harassment system. using police officers as unwitting accomplices in racial intimidation. The forensic analysis extended beyond Linda's calls to the police department's response patterns. Sarah's research team discovered that calls from Linda Crawford's address or phone number received priority routing, faster response times, and larger officer deployment than similar calls from other residents. Someone had flagged her as a reliable complainant, whose reports deserved immediate attention. The preferential treatment made sense when viewed through the lens of Robert Crawford's union position. His influence within the department had created a protection racket where his wife's complaints received special consideration, regardless of their validity. Officers who might have questioned Linda's pattern of targeting black residents stayed silent because challenging her meant challenging the union representative's family. Sarah's investigation revealed that Robert Crawford had been present at union meetings where officers discussed problem residents who filed complaints against police. He had access to personnel files, disciplinary records, and internal communications that could be used to retaliate against officers who didn't cooperate with Linda's harassment campaign. The paper trail was damning. Internal police emails showed supervisors directing patrol units to respond quickly to calls from Linda's address. Training bulletins included language about supporting community stakeholders that veterans understood meant protecting people like the Crawfords. Performance evaluations rewarded officers for community engagement that often meant validating Linda's complaints regardless of evidence. But the most devastating discovery came from body camera footage that had been stored but never reviewed. Sarah's team found dozens of hours of recordings showing officers responding to Linda's calls with preconceived notions about guilt, asking leading questions designed to confirm rather than investigate her complaints, and treating people of color as suspects rather than citizens. In one particularly damaging recording, an officer approached Dr. Roberts with his weapon drawn, demanding identification before asking what he was doing at this address. When Dr. Roberts explained that he owned the house, the officer replied, "We'll need to verify that," as if home ownership by a black man required extraordinary proof. Another recording showed officers questioning Mrs. Thompson about her right to walk her dog in a public neighborhood, asking whether she had permission to be there, and why she hadn't chosen to exercise her pet in your own area. The assumption that black residents needed permission to occupy public space was casual, automatic, institutional. Sarah realized she wasn't just building a case against Linda Crawford or even the Coral Springs Police Department. She was documenting a conspiracy that extended throughout South Florida's law enforcement community, where union influence had created protection systems for people who weaponized police power against racial minorities. The broader investigation revealed that Robert Crawford's influence extended beyond Coral Springs. He had negotiated similar qualified immunity protections for officers in 6 departments across 3 counties. His union had successfully defended officers in 17 racial profiling cases over the past 5 years, creating a legal environment where complaints like Linda's faced no meaningful scrutiny. Sarah's team discovered that the Crawford family had systematically documented their complaints, creating files that portrayed Linda as a concerned citizen under siege from criminal elements threatening her neighborhood. The documentation was sophisticated, professional, designed to support legal challenges against anyone who questioned Linda's motives or methods. But Linda and Robert Crawford had made one crucial mistake. They had never anticipated that their victims would have access to the same legal resources they used to protect themselves. They had never considered that a civil rights attorney might live 3 blocks away, that their harassment system might target someone equipped to dismantle it entirely. By 2 p.m., Sarah had compiled a federal civil rights complaint that named Linda Crawford, Robert Crawford, the Coral Springs Police Department, the police union, and 6 individual officers as defendants. The lawsuit sought monetary damages for constitutional violations, injunctive relief requiring systemic police reforms, and criminal referrals for conspiracy to violate civil rights. The case would become a landmark precedent for holding police unions accountable when their members facilitated racial harassment. It would establish legal frameworks for challenging systematic abuse of 911 systems. Most importantly, it would demonstrate that viral videos, when supported by thorough legal investigation, could reshape institutional behavior rather than just generating temporary outrage. Sarah looked out her office window at the basketball court where her sons had been handcuffed 24 hours earlier. Camera crews still lined the street, waiting for statements, reactions, developments in a story that was far from over. But the real work was happening away from cameras, in the methodical construction of legal arguments that could protect future children from experiencing what Marcus and Malik had endured. She picked up her phone to call Detective Wilson with a question that would define everything that followed. How many other Linda Crawfords are there in your jurisdiction, and how long has your department been enabling them? The steps of the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale had been transformed into an amphitheater of accountability. News crews from across the state arranged their equipment in careful formation. Satellite trucks lined the street like mechanical monuments to the moment's significance, and reporters checked their audio levels while reviewing notes about the case that had exploded from suburban confrontation to federal civil rights action in less than 48 hours. Sarah Williams stood at the podium at exactly 10 a.m., flanked by Marcus and Malik in their school uniforms. Crisp white shirts, navy ties, and blazers that transformed them from viral video subjects back into what they had always been. Honor roll students, whose only crime was existing while black in a space someone else claimed to control. Behind them stood a coalition that represented more than legal firepower. Dr. Michael Roberts in his physician's coat, Mrs. Angela Thompson holding her grandmother's Civil Rights March photo, Jamal Stevens in his high school varsity jacket, and 6 other families whose encounters with Linda Crawford's harassment system had been documented, recorded, and legally verified. The assembled media recognized the staging immediately. This wasn't just about 2 boys and a basketball court. This was about systematic abuse of police power, institutional racism protected by union influence, and the kind of conspiracy that federal civil rights law had been designed to dismantle. Sarah approached the microphone cluster with the measured confidence of someone who had spent her career in moments exactly like this, where legal precedent collided with social justice and the Constitution's promises faced their most practical test. 2 days ago, I appeared on Good Morning Miami to discuss police reform and the $50 million settlement our firm won against the Broward County Sheriff's Office, she began, her voice carrying across the courthouse plaza with courtroom-tested authority. I spoke about the need for accountability when law enforcement fails to recognize their own racial bias, about training programs that could prevent constitutional violations, about the importance of protecting citizens' rights regardless of their skin color. She paused, letting the irony settle into the humid South Florida air where reporters scribbled notes and camera operators adjusted their focus. That same afternoon, my 13-year-old sons were handcuffed for playing basketball in a public recreation area, victims of exactly the kind of systematic racial profiling I had spent the morning discussing on television. The crowd stirred, supporters nodding in recognition, skeptics shifting uncomfortably, journalists sensing the narrative thread that would define their coverage. Sarah continued with the precision of someone presenting evidence to a jury that represented the entire country. But this case isn't about ironic timing or even about individual racism. This case is about something far more dangerous: the systematic abuse of police power by citizens who have learned to weaponize law enforcement against people whose presence makes them uncomfortable. Sarah gestured toward the families behind her, each representing a documented encounter with Linda Crawford's harassment system. Over the past 18 months, Linda Crawford called police 47 times to report people of color for the crime of existing in spaces she considered her domain. 47 times, the Coral Springs Police Department responded without investigation, without question, without consideration that the complainant might be systematically filing false reports. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had captured the original confrontation on video, had driven down from Coral Springs to witness this moment. She stood in the crowd with tears in her eyes, recognizing that her decision to press record had opened a door that would transform how police departments across the country responded to racially motivated complaints. "Doctor,"
Michael Roberts,
Sarah continued, gesturing toward the pediatrician, was handcuffed in his own driveway for the crime of unlocking his front door while black. Mrs. Angela Thompson was interrogated for walking her dog past Linda Crawford's friend's house. Jamal Stevens was questioned as a potential threat for waiting for his school bus. Each name carried weight, each case representing constitutional violations that had been normalized through institutional complicity. Sarah's voice gained strength as she moved through the evidence her team had compiled. Our investigation reveals that Linda Crawford's husband, Robert Crawford, serves as union representative for the South Florida Police Benevolent Association. He negotiated qualified immunity protections that shield officers from accountability when they participate in exactly this kind of harassment. Linda Crawford didn't just weaponize police power. She had institutional protection from someone who helped design the system to be unaccountable. The revelation sent murmurs through the assembled media. This wasn't just neighbor versus neighbor conflict. This was systematic corruption that reached into the heart of police union politics and legal protection rackets that enabled racial harassment under color of law. Detective James Wilson, standing in the back of the crowd in civilian clothes, felt vindicated in his decision to provide Sarah's team with internal police documents. He had watched colleagues respond to Linda Crawford's calls with automatic deference, never questioning the pattern, never investigating the complainant's motives. The preferential treatment had always felt wrong, but challenging it meant challenging the union representative's family. Today, we are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983 against Linda Crawford, Robert Crawford, the Coral Springs Police Department, the South Florida Police Benevolent Association, and 6 individual officers who participated in this conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. The legal language was precise, but Sarah translated it for the cameras that would carry this message across social media platforms and evening news broadcasts. We are seeking monetary damages for the families who were terrorized by this harassment system. We are seeking injunctive relief that will require comprehensive police reform, bias training, and oversight mechanisms to prevent this abuse from continuing. Most importantly, we are seeking criminal referrals for conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal law. Marcus and Malik stood behind their mother with the composure their training had given them, watching her transform their afternoon of terror into a legal framework that could protect other children from experiencing what they had endured. Their presence spoke to the human cost of systematic racism, while their dignity refuted every stereotype that had motivated Linda Crawford's harassment. Sarah played audio from Linda's 911 calls over the courthouse sound system, letting the assembled crowd hear the escalation patterns her team had identified. Linda's voice transformed from concerned neighbor to frantic victim to implicit threat assessor, each call designed to trigger maximum police response against people whose only crime was existing in public space. In the Dr. Roberts case, you'll hear Linda Crawford describe a black male with tools attempting to break in, followed by, "I think he has a weapon." Dr. Roberts was carrying house keys and a stethoscope. This wasn't misidentification. This was deliberate fabrication designed to endanger a man's life. The courthouse plaza fell silent except for the sound of Linda's recorded voice describing threats that existed nowhere but in her imagination. The audio was damning, transforming speculation about racial bias into documented evidence of systematic false reporting designed to weaponize police response. Reporter Ashley Carter from Channel 12 raised her hand during the question period. "Mrs. Williams, some critics suggest this lawsuit is opportunistic, that you're exploiting your children's experience for professional gain. How do you respond?" Sarah's expression hardened slightly, recognizing the question that revealed how deeply racial bias infected even media coverage of constitutional violations. Miss Carter, if my children were white, would anyone question whether their civil rights deserved legal protection? Would anyone suggest that documenting police misconduct was opportunistic rather than necessary? Sarah's response was sharp, cutting. The suggestion that black families should accept constitutional violations quietly, that seeking legal redress somehow discredits our victimization, is exactly the kind of thinking that enabled Linda Crawford's harassment system. The reporter nodded, recognizing that her question had inadvertently revealed the bias Sarah's lawsuit was designed to address. Other hands went up, national media representatives seeking quotes that would define evening news coverage, local reporters investigating angles that would resonate with South Florida audiences, legal correspondents analyzing the case's potential impact on civil rights law. "What do you want to happen to Linda Crawford?" asked a reporter from CNN. Sarah's pause was deliberate, considering. "I want Mrs. Crawford to face the same legal consequences that any citizen faces when they systematically file false police reports. I want her to understand that weaponizing law enforcement against people of color is not community protection. It's a conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. Most importantly, I want systemic change that prevents future Linda Crawfords from using police departments as personal harassment systems." The question everyone wanted to ask finally came from a reporter representing Fox News. "Do you believe the Coral Springs Police Department intentionally discriminated, or were they simply responding to citizen complaints in good faith?" Sarah's response would be quoted in legal briefs for years to come. "Good faith requires investigation, not automatic deference to complainants who target people based on race. When police departments respond to 47 complaints from the same person targeting the same demographic without ever questioning the pattern, that's not good faith. That's willful blindness that violates constitutional rights." As the press conference concluded, Sarah gathered her sons close for photographs that would appear in newspapers across the country. Marcus and Malik had become symbols of resilience, preparation, and the next generation's refusal to accept that their rights were negotiable based on other people's comfort levels. The legal case would take months to resolve, but the precedent was already being set. Police departments across the country were reviewing their response protocols to racially motivated complaints. Union representatives were reconsidering the political cost of protecting members who enabled harassment systems. Most importantly, parents in suburban communities nationwide were having conversations with their children about recording interactions, knowing their rights, and refusing to internalize other people's prejudices. Linda Crawford watched the press conference from her locked house, surrounded by legal papers and termination notices, finally understanding that her harassment system had targeted someone equipped to dismantle it completely. The viral videos had destroyed her reputation, but Sarah Williams' legal strategy would reshape the institutional frameworks that had enabled her behavior. The basketball court where everything began remained empty that afternoon, but not because anyone was afraid to use it. It had become a pilgrimage site where families drove to take photographs, where civil rights organizations held planning meetings, where children practiced free throws while their parents discussed the legal precedents being established just miles away in the federal courthouse. Justice Sarah Williams understood as she gathered her legal papers and prepared to return to the methodical work of constitutional litigation, it wasn't just about individual accountability. It was about dismantling the systems that made Linda Crawford's possible, protecting Marcus and Malik's, and ensuring that basketball courts remained spaces for childhood rather than venues for adult prejudice. 6 months later, the basketball court on Magnolia Court had been transformed into something its original designers never intended: a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the possibility that systematic change could emerge from individual courage. The chain-link fence that Linda Crawford had once used to mark her territory now displayed a small bronze plaque installed by the Coral Springs City Council. "In memory of all children whose rights to public space have been challenged, and in honor of those who stood firm in defense of justice. Sarah Williams stood at her kitchen window, watching Marcus and Malik practice free throws with a collection of neighborhood children that would have been unimaginable during Linda Crawford's reign of harassment. The players represented every demographic the former real estate agent had tried to exclude: Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, children from families that had lived in Coral Springs for generations, alongside others whose parents had arrived seeking the American dream that the suburbs still promised to some. The legal settlement had been comprehensive, historic, and precedent-setting. Linda Crawford had paid $800,000 in damages to the families she had terrorized, while her husband Robert lost his union position and faced federal charges for conspiracy to violate civil rights. The Coral Springs Police Department implemented mandatory bias training, civilian oversight boards, and response protocols that required investigation before deployment for racially charged complaints. But the institutional changes extended far beyond one suburb in South Florida. Police departments across 37 states had revised their procedures for handling complaints from repeat callers, creating early warning systems that flagged potential harassment patterns before they escalated to constitutional violations. The Crawford Protocols, as civil rights attorneys had begun calling them, required documentation, verification, and supervisor approval for responses to citizens whose complaint history suggested systematic targeting of specific demographics. Sarah's phone still rang daily with requests from families experiencing similar harassment, from attorneys building civil rights cases, from police chiefs seeking guidance on implementing bias prevention programs. The case had become a template for challenging systematic abuse of law enforcement by citizens who had learned to weaponize police power against communities of color. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had captured the original confrontation on video, had become an unlikely civil rights advocate, speaking at community meetings about the importance of documenting bias incidents and refusing to enable racial harassment through silence. Her decision to press record had been transformed from neighborhood drama into civic duty that inspired bystanders nationwide to document rather than ignore constitutional violations. Detective James Wilson had been promoted to head the Coral Springs Police Department's new Civil Rights Compliance Division, a position created specifically to prevent future Linda Crawfords from exploiting police resources for personal racial harassment. His first case involved identifying 17 other repeat complainants whose calling patterns suggested similar abuse of the 911 system. The basketball court itself had become a gathering place that transcended its original recreational purpose. Every Sunday afternoon, families from across Coral Springs brought children to play while parents discussed community issues, local politics, and the ongoing work of creating neighborhoods where belonging wasn't determined by demographics. The informal gatherings had evolved into a civic organization that monitored local government, supported candidates who prioritized civil rights, and ensured that Linda Crawford's harassment system could never be rebuilt under different leadership. Linda Crawford had moved out of Coral Springs 3 months after the settlement, her real estate career destroyed, her social standing obliterated, her marriage to Robert strained beyond repair by the financial and legal consequences of their conspiracy. The house at 847 Magnolia Court had been sold to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a black cardiologist who deliberately chose the property to make a statement about who belonged in spaces that had once been defended through racial exclusion. Dr. Hendricks had invited the Williams family to dinner during her first week in the house, sitting in the same kitchen where Linda Crawford had watched children with suspicion and planned their harassment. The two families had discussed the irony of the moment while their children played together in the yard that had once been an observation post for racial policing. The viral videos that had initially spread the story continued to circulate, but their meaning had evolved from documentation of individual racism to educational tools used in police academies, law schools, and community training programs. Marcus and Malik had become reluctant symbols of preparation, composure, and the next generation's refusal to accept that their constitutional rights were subject to other people's comfort levels. The boys themselves had returned to the rhythms of ordinary adolescence: basketball, homework, friends, and the gradual process of understanding that they had participated in something larger than a neighborhood confrontation. Their experience had been traumatic, but it had also been empowering in ways that would shape their understanding of citizenship, justice, and their own agency within systems that had historically excluded people who looked like them. Sarah had been invited to speak at law schools, police academies, and civil rights conferences across the country, sharing the legal strategies that had transformed viral outrage into institutional change. Her practice had expanded to include a new division specializing in systematic harassment cases, with attorneys in 12 states working to identify and dismantle Crawford-style abuse networks before they could terrorize entire communities. The morning news programs that had featured Sarah's initial interview about police reform now regularly covered the ongoing implementation of Crawford protocols in departments nationwide. The irony of her children's arrest occurring hours after her television discussion of bias training had become a case study in how quickly theoretical discussions of civil rights could become personal experiences of constitutional violation. But perhaps the most significant change was invisible, unmeasurable, present only in what didn't happen. Children who played in public spaces without being questioned, families who walked through neighborhoods without being reported, teenagers who waited for buses without being criminalized. The systematic documentation of Linda Crawford's harassment had created legal precedents that protected people who would never know their rights had been preserved by two boys with a basketball. Marcus made a perfect free throw as Sarah watched from the window, the ball arcing through Florida sunshine before dropping cleanly through the net. Malik retrieved it and passed it back with the easy confidence of someone who understood that this space, this moment, this simple act of play was his constitutional right rather than someone else's permission to grant. The basketball bounced against asphalt with the same rhythmic sound that had echoed through the neighborhood in the afternoon when Linda Crawford decided that children's presence required police intervention. But now the sound carried a different meaning. Not the threat that had triggered harassment, but the promise that public spaces could remain public, that childhood could continue despite adult prejudice, that justice was possible when preparation met opportunity and courage chose documentation over silence. Sarah smiled as she watched her sons play, knowing that the basketball court had been returned to its original purpose, while gaining new significance as a place where constitutional rights had been defended, where systematic oppression had been challenged, and where the future continued to practice free throws while their parents worked to ensure that freedom remained free. The work was far from over, but today children were playing basketball without anyone calling the police, and that was progress worth celebrating. Stories like this remind us that change is possible when we refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to stay updated on more cases where ordinary people fought back against systematic oppression and won. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that knowledge truly is the most powerful weapon we can carry, and it's the one they can never take away from us. Have you or your family experienced racial profiling or harassment? Leave your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, your voice counts, and together we can document the patterns that courts need to see to create lasting change. Like this video if you believe every child deserves to play basketball without fear, and that every parent should have the tools to protect their children's constitutional rights. Remember, Marcus and Malik Williams knew their rights because their mother taught them. What are you teaching the children in your life? The next generation's freedom depends on the preparation we give them today. Justice served is just the beginning. Real change happens when we all decide to be the documenters, the witnesses, and the voices that refuse to let injustice hide in silence.